Previously on Crime Adjacent. The original FBI profile in the case of the rest stop killer got something critically wrong. The killer would never stop, the profiler said. They were sure of it, no question. And yet, he did. He did stop. After the murder of Bobby Briggs on January 20th, 1996, the rest stop killer simply vanished, disappearing from Ridgewood just as quickly as he had appeared. Perhaps, police thought, he simply moved on, haunting other towns and taking other men. Perhaps he was killed or jailed or decided he had enough. Because the thing is, that happens a lot. The pop culture imaginary around serial killers would have us believe that they will never stop, not until captured or killed. The FBI profile reinforced this in Ridgewood. Remember that 2005 FBI symposium about trying to nail down a definition of serial killing? The FBI's report out of that conference contradicts its own profile in this case, arguing sometimes killers just get too old and call it a day. In fact, there's a whole host of reasons serial killers are known to stop, or at least pause. The Zodiac Killer, for instance, is thought to have stopped after the murder of Paul Stine in 1969. Although the killer claimed many more victims in letters and taunts to the press and the police, the official victim count stands at 5. Forensic psychologists wonder if the last murder spooked him. After the Stein murder, he was stopped on the sidewalk by police, who were told to be on the lookout for a black man, not a white man. So the Zodiac just barely slipped away. Some theorize his letters took the place of killing, his way of wielding control without the same fear of getting caught. Golden State Killer Joseph DeAngelo took a break from his murder and sexual assaults from 1981 to 1986. He had also nearly been caught, and also he began having children. In 1986, he emerged for one last murder and then is thought to have stopped altogether, living a quiet life in Citrus Heights, a peaceful Sacramento suburb, while making an occasional phone call to prior victims just to terrorize them all over again. Like the Zodiac, this would be a way to exert narcissistic control over his victims and society at large, even if he wasn't killing any longer. The BTK stopped, the Monster of Florence, the West Mesa Bone Collector, the Doodler. It happened all the time. Ridgewood police thought it happened there as well. But that all changed on Monday, December 11th, 2023. That all changed with Gary Pugh. Here's the story. But first, please like and review and follow Crime Adjacent on your favorite listening app. It helps more than you know to keep the show going, and it is deeply, deeply appreciated. From San Francisco, this is Crime Adjacent, the never-ending true crime story told weekly. I'm Chase Patrick. For Ridgewood City Council member Gary Pugh, Monday morning, December 11th, 2023, looked no different than any other Monday, just a typical day in the life. Until he simply vanished off the street, in broad daylight, with no witnesses whatsoever. Given what police were able to discover, the killer had just a 2-minute window to make this all possible. The day started early. As usual, Gary woke before his family, his wife Susan, and their 2 10-year-old boys. He took his beloved twin dachshunds, Fettuccine and Alfredo, for a walk around the block under towering elm trees. This was the oldest section of town. Green lawns, big trees, white picket fences. It was walkable to downtown. Tommy Coulee and Bobby Calvin once lived nearby. In fact, Tommy's old house on Elm Street was just 2 blocks away. That morning, Gary waved to neighbors and early joggers, chatted with some. People remembered, no doubt. They told stories about it later, inserting themselves into the legend, like, I spoke to Gary just hours before. Well, you know. Because here's the thing about Gary Pugh. People remembered seeing him. It was impossible not to. Gary stood nearly 7 feet tall and had a head the size of a cartoon fishbowl. You couldn't miss him. Up until 11 a.m. that day, he was spotted all over town. Witness statements poured in. I saw him on Elm Street. I saw him downtown. I saw him on Cherry Street. People noticed. He stood out. And then poof, He vanished. Someone grabbed him, Gary Pugh, all 7 feet and 300 pounds of him. His murder would reignite this case and set in motion a series of events that would bring me home to Ridgewood on Thursday morning. By Saturday night, 2 more people would be dead, and the town would, at long last, realize the full aching scope of the rest stop killer murders. And it all begins to unravel on that quiet Monday morning, December 11th, 2023. Police retraced Gary's steps that morning, trying to assemble a picture of when and how he collided with the man who murdered him. After his walk with his dogs and the usual making of school lunches, he dropped his boys at K.I. Smith Elementary School at 8:30 a.m. Yes, this is the same school wired for internet by Bobby Calvin so many years ago. Again, remember, small town. Parents reported to police that they saw Gary shooting the bull in the drop-off line. I saw him at school. He holds up the whole line. Gary was a talker. After all, he was a city council member who catapulted to office with emotional stem-winders about keeping the small-town charm of Ridgewood alive. After school drop-off, he immediately went to Mix's Diner downtown and shot the bull with the locals there as well. Gary talked to everyone. I saw him at Mix's, talked to him even. At 9:30 a.m., he dropped his car at the mechanic's for an oil change. Get this. This was the same Cherry Street auto shop once owned by Tommy Coulee. After his death in a period of vacancy, the shop had been in the hands of a Polish immigrant named Peter Lewandowski since the early 2000s. All these coincidences might seem shocking or even laden with import. The same neighborhood, the same school, the same diner, the same mechanic's shop. But again, this is a small town. There's just not that many diners or schools or auto shops. While his car was being serviced, Gary was seen strolling along Cherry Street, presumably taking care of business while waiting for his car. I saw him on the sidewalk. He was on a phone call. Indeed, phone records reveal he made several calls. At 9:45 to his wife, at 10 a.m. to his office at City Hall, at 10:20 to a big financial supporter. Data records show he checked the internet. Nothing special, a schedule for dog shows up and down the state. He was proud of his little show dogs. They won Best in Show wherever they went. Most people liked Gary, but in the dog show world, there was more than a little jealousy and bad blood given his lock on the blue ribbon wherever he went with those inky black land seals, the rarest of dachshunds. In fact, early in the investigation, Detective Jones had an officer track down anyone in the dog show world who would hold a grudge, which, honestly, not a bad call. I could picture it, like that movie, Best in Show meets Serial, or Agatha Christie, or Murder, She Wrote. I'd watch. Alas, it went nowhere. The dog world was ruled out. So police turned their attention back to the auto garage on Cherry Street in a critical 2-minute window when the killer must have acted. This is key. After making his phone calls while waiting for his car, Gary returned to the shop at exactly 10:31 a.m. We know this because 2023 had something 1995 and 1996 did not. iPhones, tracking technology, and surveillance cameras everywhere. Gary was seen on the front door surveillance camera of the shop. He picked up his car just moments after returning, within the same minute. Shop owner Peter Lewandowski himself directed Gary to his car, where it was parked in a cramped lot on the side of the shop. The car had just been finished, and one of Peter's crew parked it there just a few minutes earlier, like literally just a few minutes earlier, 1 or 2 minutes, 2 tops. So if Gary returned to the shop at 10:31 a.m. exactly, and the car had been parked in the cramped side lot just 2 minutes prior, that means 10:29 or 10:30. This is the 2-minute window when the killer found time to put in motion Gary's demise. It's the only time window that makes sense. Gary and Peter chatted in the small parking lot for a few minutes about the Valley development plan. It was the talk of the town. Yes, this is the very same development plan Daniel Palmer had tried to win approval for back in the 1990s when the original murders derailed his project. Now, it was back. Housing, golf courses, gas stations, shopping malls. Palmer was trying all over again. In fact, the project was up for a vote the following week. It divided the town. Gary was steadfastly against it. He wanted to preserve the pristine valley and the shimmering lake and save the small-town charm of Ridgewood, not watch it grow into just one more strip mall-like suburb like the rest of the Bay Area. Peter, the shop owner, thought the development was a good idea. For him, it meant more cars and more potential customers. Peter told police that he and Gary spoke for a few minutes, cordially. He said Gary got into his car at about 10:35 a.m., though he couldn't be exactly sure. Thankfully, phone records show that Gary had made one last phone call to the Sacramento Dog Show main office before hanging up at exactly 10:45 a.m. and then driving off the Cherry Street parking lot. The surveillance camera caught the car exiting the front, but did not cover the side area. Everything looked fine. Police put Peter Lewandowski through the ringer. They investigated the shop owner and his entire crew of 3 workers. They checked his background. They checked their backgrounds. They were all clean. Peter himself seemed the unlikeliest candidate to be the killer, given he immigrated to America and moved to Ridgewood a solid 5 years after the original murders. He had heard rumors and gossip and read the annual story in the recorder about the deaths, but that was it. Jones cleared him. Peter and his crew reported no weird occurrences, no strangers loitering nearby, nothing out of the ordinary at all. Police were so fixated on the auto workers because of what happened next, and the links between Gary's murder and the murder of Bobby Briggs in 1996. Remember, Briggs, too, was taken not far from the Cherry Street auto shop so many years ago. He went out for a Wendy's Frosty and never returned. But there was something else. Like I said, at 10:45 a.m., Gary rolled off the lot. Forensic technology had changed a lot between 1996 and 2023. Police used Bluetooth technology to determine that as he traveled, his phone tried to connect to passing cars, to someone's house speaker, and to a speaker at Mix's Diner. From this, they were able to retrace his route. He was on his way, it seemed, from the auto shop, through downtown, past his house, into City Hall for an 11 a.m. meeting about the Palmer development in the valley. The drive should have taken only 10 minutes or so, but his car suddenly stopped on Edgewood Lane. This would have been around 10:55 a.m. He was only a quarter mile from his house and half a mile to City Hall. This is exactly where police later discovered his car. They knew to look there because Chief Williams was on the way to the exact same meeting at 11 a.m., but was incredibly late. He reported that he had business to attend for a different case and was about an hour late to the 11 a.m. meeting. He remembers vividly that it was exactly noon when he saw Gary's car parked on Edgewood Lane. He remembers this because he thought he would be in trouble. He presumed he missed the 11 a.m. meeting altogether and that Gary had simply left the meeting and moved on to other matters. So noon. It stuck in Chief Williams' head. He was sure that's when he saw the empty car on Edgewood Lane. This would become important later. Because the thing is, just like Chief Williams, Gary also never made it to the 11 a.m. meeting. His car never moved from Edgewood Lane. No one could reach him. A city planner, a city engineer, the city manager, and a city lawyer waited for about a half hour for both Gary and the police chief to show up. Neither did. It was odd. The vote on the Palmer development was in 1 week, the following Tuesday. Both men were keen to know as many details as possible. Gary himself had insisted on the meeting, but he was a no-show. City manager Francine Maloney said it was the first meeting she could recall that Gary had missed. If people spotted Gary throughout town that morning, that all changed after he left the auto shop parking lot. No one else reported seeing Gary between 10:45 a.m. when he left the shop and noon when Chief Williams spotted his abandoned car on Edgewood Lane. This is the kill window. Sometime in that hour and 15-minute span, the killer grabbed him. But how? Well, this is why the police focused so much attention on the auto workers in that 2-minute time window when the car was parked in the side of the lot by the crew before Gary came to retrieve it just moments later. The rear passenger side tire had been tampered with. Someone loosened the lug nuts. After Gary rolled off the lot, the tire probably wobbled and wobbled until Gary finally had enough and pulled over on Edgewood Lane to inspect what was happening. Remember, This is exactly what the Zodiac Killer did in 1970 with Kathleen Johns, and this is exactly what the Rest Stop Killer did with Bobby Briggs in 1996, the last killing before he suddenly disappeared. It was the first inkling that the same killer had returned to Ridgewood. But think about how odd this is. Gary had literally just picked up his car from the mechanic. Peter, the owner, says there is no way his crew would have let a car wobble off with loose lug nuts. No way. Besides, they only changed the oil and cleaned up a little. They put air in the tires, but that was it. The tires were fine. They didn't even rotate them. He was sure of it. His crew would have found the issue and fixed it, no question. But again, Peter and his crew were clean. Jones triple-checked. None of them left the auto shop until closing at 5. No one went to lunch. No one left sick. They were all there, all of them, spotted on the surveillance cameras all day. Still, somehow, the lug nuts were loosened. So how on earth did the killer have time and opportunity to loosen them? As you can tell by now, timelines are so important to this case. It's maddening to consider how slippery the killer acted, diving in and out of people's lives to ruin them within mere moments of capture. The short window when the car was left in the side lot, between 10:29 a.m. and 10:31 a.m., Detective Jones thinks that's the only window of time the killer could have loosened the lug nuts. It's possible the killer sneaked up and did it with Gary in the car yapping on his cell phone, but that seemed unlikely, risky. Jones thinks the killer was stalking Gary that morning, waiting for just the right moment of opportunity to strike. Police cannot say for certain what happened after this, but they presume the killer had followed Gary off the lot, waiting for the tire to wobble free. An inspection of his trunk revealed that the spare had been slashed. This was clearly planned, and all evidence points to something critical and disturbing. When Gary stopped on Edgewood Lane, police believe the killer quite likely pulled up and offered a helping hand. Just a friendly neighbor, there to help. What great timing, a happy coincidence. You see, there was no sign of struggle, not on the scene or on Gary's body. No defensive wounds at all. No 911 calls from neighbors. This was a quiet street. People would have noticed a fight or shouts or violence, especially with someone as big and loud as Gary. Police presume he was comfortable enough to accept a ride. He was so close to City Hall, so close to his home. It was just blocks away. But for some reason, Gary got into someone else's car. Then, he was driven past City Hall, past his house, and out to the valley. Past Constance's motel, which was still there. Past Len's towing, which was also still there. Detective Jones said all this adds up to the same conclusion. Gary most definitely knew his killer. But who? Who could take him out there? Gary is late for a meeting at this point, probably itching to get there. And yet he's driven out to the valley, to the same spot where 3 men were murdered nearly 30 years ago. Who could do this? And who would Gary let do this? Jones said there were so many similarities between Gary's murder and the original 3, but also very important differences, critical differences. This gets a little graphic here, so be warned. Yes, Gary was subdued. Yes, he was stomped. Yes, it was the same kidnapping scenario from town in the same dump site in the valley. The killer, and this is important, even took the exact same token that he took from his original victims in the 90s. At that time, that week when I arrived in town, Jones would not confirm what the token was. That information would come out soon enough, by the end of the week in fact, when everything broke wide open. But on that Monday, it was the single biggest link between the murders, something only the killer and the police knew about. It was what let Jones and Williams know the same killer had suddenly reemerged, that he hadn't moved on or stopped at all. But even with the same token and same signature methods of kidnapping and stomping and dumping in the exact same Lover's Lane location, Gary's killing just seemed off. There were drag marks this time, from the 2-lane road to an oak tree about 20 yards away. The original victims walked to their demise, on their own, easily, no dragging, no stumbling, no signs of a struggle. And the damage to Gary's body wasn't as bad, relatively speaking, as it was in the 90s. He was stomped and left to die, but there wasn't as much overkill. Gary was not flattened. It may be because of his sheer size, as if the killer was trying to stomp Fezzik, not an easy task. Or maybe because it was practically broad daylight, close to noon. The killer might have spotted hikers near the lake or had to hurry or perhaps even stop. But most critically, and this is key, Gary Pugh was stabbed first. That didn't happen with the first murders. They were knocked out with a ferocious blow to the head. In her medical examiner's report, which again, thanks to Winnie Freeman at the newspaper, Dr. Antra Gavini reported that Gary had been stabbed precisely with a small, thin knife between the C6 and C7 vertebrae. This takes incredible skill, given the bony structure of the spine, to get in there and slice the spinal cord. Gavini said, "Someone knew what they were doing. This wasn't luck." She reported that Gary would have been instantly paralyzed. So the killer would have had to drag him out of the car, as evidenced by marks at the scene. These differences added up and told Jones a lot. For one thing, the killer was perhaps smaller, less sure, not able to drag men around. Jones said, "It's been 30 years. Perhaps the killer had aged. Perhaps it was a copycat. That happened." Then again, Gary was impossibly large. That's hard to overstate. Even a practiced serial killer would have a hard time subduing Gary. In a cramped car, even a subtle shift of his weight would have been enough to fend off a sneak attack. Gavini said a quick, incisive stab wound would have been more of a sure thing to subdue him than a blow to the head. So, add it all up, and here's what we know. Gary's car was tinkered with, possibly at the shop, possibly before, but unlikely, as the crew would have spotted damage and fixed it. Most likely, it happened in that super short time frame when the car was finished and parked in the side lot, but before Gary picked it up just 2 minutes later. This is conjecture. It's never been determined. But it's the only window that makes sense to damage the tire. So then, after the auto shop, Gary rolls through town on the way to an important meeting to discuss the Palmer development, which is up for a vote the following week. He never makes it. His car wobbles. He stops on Ridgewood Lane. He probably checks the spare. It's also damaged. But then along comes a friendly face, someone he likely knows. Again, there were no signs of struggle anywhere. He wasn't forced. He went willingly. So then Gary finds himself in a friend's car, driven to the very valley the meeting was about. He must have thought it strange, I'm only guessing, but he was so close to his house or city hall or even the auto shop, any place that would have made more sense than the valley. This told Jones he likely knew his killer very well and simply trusted the driver. But then, at some point, he's stabbed in the back of the neck. It's a precise wound. Gavini said someone knows how to do this. A doctor, a hunter, someone with medical knowledge, or perhaps just an older killer who isn't as strong as he used to be and changed up his methods. Gary is then dragged about 20 yards to an oak tree where the killer finishes the job, stomping him to death. This took strength. Remember, Gary was impossibly large. Then, the killer took the same token he had taken from Tommy and the two Bobbies back in the 90s. Williams said, "We knew instantly he was back, and we were determined to nail him before he escalated." Back in the 90s, the killer struck 3 times before vanishing. Jones and Williams said they were both aware of the pattern. If Gary was number 1, they had to stop the killer before victims 2 and 3 were taken. That Monday afternoon, standing in the valley once again, standing before the body of their good friend, Gary Pugh, and wondering how on earth they were going to tell his wife and his boys, Williams and Jones turned to each other and shared a thought without saying a word. The clock was ticking. Jones said she immediately flashed through the usual suspects. There was Len Macy, the tow truck driver, but this time he wasn't home during the killing. He was on a call downtown. He had a receipt for it. But it was on Main Street, close to City Hall, close to the auto shop on Cherry Street, not far from Edgewood Lane, where Gary's car was stopped. But again, he had proof he was on the job. He towed a car to the auto shop. People accounted for him. One key witness had seen him around town, B. Macy. She was his ex so many years ago and was having lunch downtown when she spotted him. They waved. Len then hitched up the car without saying a word and vanished. Jones thought it was suspicious, given he was in the same general area, but again, that's all she had. Jones admitted she also conjured up the worst thoughts about her own police chief, Al Williams, the very guy who had trained her to be a detective and helped her investigate the original killings. There were only a handful of people around town who knew the killer's signature behaviors and tokens, and Williams was one of them. He was supposed to be at the same meeting as Gary, but was running too late. He couldn't account for its time, saying only that he was working on a case. But he was the chief. If anyone was allowed to have secrets, it was the chief. Jones could only push so far. But she couldn't help but think. Gary likely would have gotten into a car, willingly, with both of these men, whom he had known for years, decades. Gary cast the deciding vote to make Williams chief back in 2015. They may have disagreed on the police budget and the Palmer development. Chief Williams was a big fan. But they remained friends, colleagues. Jones said she didn't really believe it, but she also had to check it out. She also checked out former Chief Frank Ricci, who was retired now and living his best life. He was at a pickleball tournament in Fairfield at the time and had the doubles partner and trophy to prove it. Jones said she felt relieved. It made her feel guilty to point the finger so close to home at both Williams and Ricci, but she knew it had to be done. It was, after all, a small town. It had to be someone. And someone who knew the victims. Jones found her way quickly to the next highest suspect on the list. You might have guessed at this point. Daniel Palmer. He owns the land. He found 2 of the bodies in the 1990s. And on that Monday afternoon, in December 2023, he also found Gary Pugh. At precisely 1:46 p.m., Daniel Palmer made the 911 phone call to police, alerting them to yet another murder victim in his valley. But Daniel Palmer hadn't stumbled across just any body. This was City Council member Gary Pugh, who was steadfastly against Palmer's development plans, which were worth millions, maybe hundreds of millions, if Palmer could just get the City Council to give its approval. Jones said she immediately had a dark thought. Approval. One way or another. I need to be upfront here before we move on. It's going to get weird. There's no other way to put it. Up to this point, I've been using old newspaper articles, public records, and interviews conducted to piece together a story of what happened in the past, in the 1990s. But a few days after Gary's murder, I returned home for the first time in nearly 30 years. So much of the reporting of this story from here on out relies on my first-hand experiences there in Ridgewood over just a handful of days in December 2023. And what I encountered felt very much like the town I remembered as a child. From the outside, Ridgewood looked charming and small and quaint, but just underneath the surface, it vibrated with a sort of menace. This is a small town. I keep saying that. Everyone knows everyone. Some are friends, but also some harbor old grudges. Things are going to move fast. It was a strange week. But remember this, most of all. Remember this name. She's key to everything. Marianne Bachmeier. Remember when I told you at the very beginning in episode 1 that Bachmeier sneaked a gun into a courthouse in Germany in the 1980s and unloaded the entire magazine into the man who had kidnapped and raped and murdered her daughter? Remember when I asked if this story is about justice or maybe vengeance and that I wasn't really sure which? There's a reason I started this whole thing with Marianne Bachmeier. Because just days after the death of Gary Pugh and the others who would follow that week in December 2023, the answer would become crystal clear. Next time on Crime Adjacent. Listener Molly Miller tipped us off. Together with Constance Bird, the owner of the horse barn out in the valley, and a longtime listener herself, Molly came to our live show in San Francisco and approached Nikki. She said the rest stop killer was back and that the police were covering it up. It was strange, so we called her. The phone rang and rang and rang until finally, a click, then a pause, breathing, a tentative hello. Nikki introduced herself, and then after a long pause, Molly said, "Don't come. I was wrong. You should stay away." And then she hung up. That settled it. That Thursday morning, I packed a bag and headed home to Ridgewood for the first time in nearly 30 years. If you like these stories, remember to review and like Crime Adjacent wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget to check out our social media channels and our Patreon page to find bonus information and behind-the-scenes content about these cases. I'm grateful for your support. It keeps this never-ending true crime story going. Thank you. Until next time, this is Chase Patrick from San Francisco with a reminder. Stay tuned. You'll never unhear what happens next.